Good evening. I'm so glad that you all ate before I came because one of the hardest spots to speak in is the spot before you eat. So I am delighted to be here and always happy to, and overjoyed really, to share with folks that are partnering with Habitat all over the country and all over the world. We really are blessed to be a part of something big. And when you can transform a community, transform a life, and be a part of the life-giving force that Habitat is, that's something big. So it's exciting. So Lance, thank you for the invitation to be here. Thank you to your team, Jenna and Clara, and all the folks at the Des Moines affiliate. I'm excited to be here, and I'm excited to be here with you all. I was trying to figure out what is it about, what's Iowa known for, and I felt so wise when folks were asking me how my trip to Iowa has been, and I said, it's been so Iowa nice. I was like, I'm in. But no, I really enjoyed being here and had a wonderful time today, spending some time with the folks at the Des Moines affiliate and learning more about the great work that Des Moines is involved in. I know of the work. It's one thing to know of it, to read of it, to understand it, to talk about it. It's another thing to experience it in person. So that was a great joy. So this evening, I wanted to spend a little time in conversation with you all on a topic that's really easy, and it is Together We Win. And I'd like to talk a little bit about Habitat in the context of that, and also about our own agency in this great world that we are blessed to walk upon and be a part of. Like many of you in here, I fly a lot. And recently, I was on a flight where just as we got on, the pilot said, fasten your seatbelts and hold on tight because we are probably going to experience quite a bit of turbulence on this flight. As much as I fly, I don't like one bit of turbulence. So the plane hadn't even taken off, and he gave this warning. So I said, oh, Lord, okay, let me get ready. So anyway, get on the plane, and one of my ways of getting ready to experience something I didn't want to do was to try to go into a little space where I could try to deny what I was about to enter into. And so I put my headphones on, and I tuned into the movie Night School, which, for those of you who haven't seen it, it's a silly comedy with Kevin Hart and Tiffany Haddish. But I was watching that comedy like it was an Academy Award-worthy production, because all I knew is I had to get into a space where I hoped I would not be aware of anything going on around me. Flight takes off, we're in the air, and lo and behold, we begin to hit the turbulence. And you know when you get on the plane and you kind of speak to the people next to you, but you don't speak to them too much because you don't want someone who's a talker to talk to you the entire flight. So I kind of said the niceties when I got on to the person next to me, but when we began to hit that turbulence, the first thing that happened is I reached and grabbed his hand. He grabbed mine back, and I looked up and looked around the plane, and I realized I don't know this man. I don't know anyone on this plane. But I knew that in that moment of turbulence, I needed a hand to hold. I also knew as I looked around the plane, I didn't know where those folks were from. I didn't know their politics. I didn't know their agendas. But I knew that we were on this plane together, and I wanted us all to make it. That's really an analogy for, if we were honest, what we're dealing with in our country today. We are really in the midst of some turbulent times. We're in the midst of some uneasy times. We're in the midst of a very divisive political time in our country. And on the verge of a new election in 2020, it's probably going to get even more turbulent. So I know that many of us want to put our earphones in and watch Night School. But by the mere fact that you're here, you know that we've got to do more than that. So part of our doing more tonight is I'd like us to think on this topic, Together We Win, and to understand when I say that, it's not a campaign slogan, but it's an invitation for all of us to begin to create a narrative or continue creating a narrative that defies the turbulence we are all experiencing together. We are living in a moment in history where we are faced with great challenges and great opportunities. Many of our cities are a tale of two cities, cities that are divided between the haves and the have-nots. The United States exhibits wider disparities of wealth between the rich and the poor than any other major developed nation in the world. We are in the midst in many of our cities of a housing affordability crisis. The 2019 national housing wage, which is the amount of money necessary to afford a modest two-bedroom apartment in this country, is $22.96. In a country where the minimum wage is $7.25 per hour, that means that a person must work 127 hours a week to afford a modest two-bedroom apartment. In Iowa, it requires $15.44 an hour to afford a two-bedroom apartment at fair market rental rate. And in order to do that, at $7.25 an hour, a family would need to make $15,000 annually in order to afford a modest two-bedroom apartment. Many of our cities, we're in the midst of hunger crises as well. In this country, according to Feeding America, the world's greatest food-producing nation, children and adults face poverty and hunger in every county across America. Our health care is under attack and is controversial in many places, preventing those who may need it most from accessing adequate care. Our educational systems are rife with disparity. You may be in the same city, but there are separate and unequal opportunities for our children depending upon where they live in that city. Our criminal justice system is rife with disparities and systemic issues that overly criminalize people because of the color of their skin or their socioeconomic status. According to Brian Stevenson, the founder of the Equal Justice Institute, he says that the United States incarcerates more of its citizens than any other nation in the world. The increase in the jail and prison population from less than 200,000 in 1972 to 2.2 million today has led to unprecedented prison overpopulation. The United States has 5% of the world's population, but nearly 25% of its prison population. Matthew Desmond, the writer of the Pulitzer Prize-winning book Evicted, says that if incarceration has come to define the lives of men from impoverished Black neighborhoods, eviction was shaping the lives of women from these same neighborhoods. Poor Black men have been locked up, and poor Black women have been locked out. We are in the midst of some turbulent times. Regardless of the wonderful neighborhood you may live in, your bubbles are very fragile. And if we are not willing to look outside of our comfort zones and stretch our understanding of our faith, our existence, and our purpose, it will be very difficult for all of us on this plane to make it. We need a visionary narrative at this time. We need a narrative that calls us to look further, to larger vistas and to further horizons, to create a reality of possibility and of hope. We need a narrative that transforms the negative discourse and the divisive discourse in this country into one that searches and pushes us to find a way to all get along. A narrative, I know there may be English teachers in here or writers in here who have a much more complicated definition of narrative, but for purposes of this conversation, I'll simply say that a narrative is a story. It's a story with a plot and with characters and with a theme. The power of a narrative is that a narrative has heroes, and a narrative calls forth what is successful. A narrative determines who's invisible and who's visible. A narrative paints a picture, and when done so with truth, paints a picture that can be modeled and duplicated, but when done so with statements that are not true, can be very, very dangerous. Narratives have power because they call into the forefront those who are in need and worthy of having those needs met. In narrative crafting, it's important for us to look wide and to look high and to look low, to make sure that we are truly crafting and creating a narrative that transforms lives, that builds communities, and that begins to set a standard for what's acceptable behavior and language and attitudes and what is not. A narrative can craft civility. A narrative can lead progress. So one of the things that I'm so excited about that Habitat is involved in is narrative crafting. And we're doing that through the launch of our first ever national advocacy campaign. The name of our campaign is The Cost of Home. And this national advocacy campaign really is a collection of campaigns. It's led through our DC office that's focused on advocating and pushing federal policies, but it's truly garnered the power and the voice of our affiliates like Des Moines Habitat that are working to advance policies that advance housing affordability at the state and at the local level. The Cost of Home campaign has an ambitious goal of improving housing affordability for 10 million people through policy and systems change. Because of the increased housing cost and growing income inequality in this country, nearly 1/3 of households in the U.S. face cost burdens, where they're paying, in many cases, 30% of their income, but in several cases, in a severely burdened and cost-burdened reality, they're paying more than half their income on housing. That is unacceptable, because that means that close to 1/3 of the families and households in this country are having to make the very difficult decision of choosing between their cost of home, nutritious food, health care, good schools, and reliable transportation. In the state of Iowa, 1 in 10 households are paying half or more of their income on housing. In Polk County, which is the county where Des Moines Habitat does most of their work, 1 in 8 households spend more than half their income on housing. Polk County is short more than 11,000 affordable housing units for its residents. And over the next 20 years, the service area, or essentially the central Iowa area, is expected to add close to 150,000 new jobs, which is great news. But with that comes the need to accommodate those families, those working families. And in order to do so, we'll need more than 33,000 new units to be owner-occupied. More than 50% of the demand for owner-occupied homes in this number are for homes that are priced below $175,000. In short, the problems that we face at the state level, the local level, and the federal level are too big for us to ignore. And we're doing tremendous work through the Habitat Network and through your help and your partnership to directly serve these families, but we also realize that we cannot build our way out of this crisis. We realize that we cannot build enough homes to overcome this crisis. And so we are joining together in this advocacy campaign to leverage the strength and the reputation of the valuable Habitat brand, to leverage the fact that the work we do is bipartisan. When did housing become a partisan issue? If you really think about it, housing is an American issue. And so we want to leverage our brand to tell the narrative that together we win when we come together and work to find solutions and policies that go after the policies that are preventing us from providing affordable housing and housing affordability initiatives throughout our country. We've got to come together, think creatively, to craft this narrative through our campaign, through the work that Des Moines Habitat is doing, through the ways in which we can work together and partner together, to remind ourselves and others that when we bring all of that together, we can truly win. How do we do that? Because even if we step back from the specifics and the statistics, when we think about the organizations that we're all a part of, that we're leading, that we're pushing forward, that we're trying to take into new territory, that we want to be visionary, how do we push ourselves to create this new narrative? Well, the first thing is that we must be bold and brave. We need bold and brave leaders who are courageous enough to reveal the invisible people, the invisible causes, and the invisible needs in our organizations and our communities. We need bold and brave leaders who have the moral stamina to outlast the isms of our age and to push conversations and initiatives that force each of us out of our bubbles. We need bold and brave leaders who are agile disruptors, who stop doing things the way they've always done them because they've always done them that way. We need agile disruptors who look at situations and say, you know what, we have to approach it from a different strategy. We have to come at it from a different angle. We need to think differently about this and push forward, take some risks, because people's lives are depending on us, shifting and changing. Malala Yousafzai, the young girl who was attacked by the Taliban because she stood up for education and won the Nobel Peace Prize, says, I raise up my voice not so that I can shout, but so that those without a voice can be heard. She says, in the face of those who did not think that young girls and women should be educated, that we cannot succeed when half of us are held back. We need bold and brave leaders who are willing to have courageous conversations about things that everyone else shies away from, things like race and gender justice, who are willing to do what I call diversity and inclusion yoga. Anyone in here practice yoga? Anyone in here tried to practice yoga? Yeah, that would be me. One of the things that I find interesting about yoga, and the person who yelled out the woohoo could say, that there's great reward when you cause yourself to be uncomfortable for a certain period of time. In yoga, you hold a position that's not comfortable, but you stay in that position until you get to the reward of the practice. Diversity and inclusion yoga means that we're willing to have conversations about things that we ordinarily are not comfortable talking about. We're doing it because we realize that the world we live in is diverse. And the more we exclude those who do not look like us, the more we are holding ourselves back. The more our organizations shall suffer, the more our communities will suffer. Diversity and inclusion yoga was what I say an ideal that was proposed by Dr. Martin Luther King some time ago when he wrote the letter from the Birmingham jail. He called it the Theory of Interrelatedness. And in it, he says, in a real sense, all life is interrelated. All men are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. And he says this, and this is one of my favorite quotes of his. He says, I can never be what I ought to be until you are everything that you ought to be. And you can never be what you ought to be until I am everything I ought to be. We need bold and brave leaders who are willing to look at our historical truths in this country and find ways to bring people together around a core desire to put in the hard work to correct systemic and historical ills. These are hard topics to talk about. They make you cry, they may make you feel guilty, they may make you feel ashamed, but push through all of it because our country deserves it. Your children deserve it. Our communities require it. As the elder Hillel says, if not you, who? And if not now, when? We not only need brave and bold leaders, we need imaginative leaders. I love this quote from Toni Morrison. She says, as you enter positions of trust and power, dream a little before you think. We need imaginative and creative leaders who step back for a moment and imagine a world again. Think about what could make our existence and our community even better. Dream again, because a dream can truly change the world. Langston Hughes, in his beautiful poem, I Dream a World, said, I dream a world where love will bless the earth and peace its paths adorn. I dream a world where all will know sweet freedom's way, where greed no longer saps the soul, nor avarice blights the day. A world, I dream, where black or white, whatever race you be, will share the bounties of the earth, and every man and woman is free. We need imaginative leaders who dream again and who begin to think of creative and outlandish strategies and ideas and visions of what we could create together. So I challenge you to dream again, to be builders of hope, to hope against hope, even when hopelessness and darkness try to reign in these turbulent times. Hope against hope, because your hope ignites your faith, and your faith gives feet to your hope. It's hard sometimes when things get challenging and when divisive discourse reigns to remember that you can be the light in a dark room. You can be the one that reminds others to hope again. At Habitat, we often call ourselves the builders of hope. We build a home becomes hope. We build in a community that had been neglected and abandoned, and all of a sudden there's a glimmer of hope that it can get better. Hope works as a tag team with our faith. When we look at so many of the current events, many of us would say that we've lost faith in humankind, that we've lost faith in our political system, that we've lost faith in the idea of community building. But faith, as Mohandas Gandhi said, is not something to grasp. It's a state to grow into. It's not something that happens once, but it's something that we must continue to open up and begins to emerge as we take steps into unknown territory. Helen Keller said that faith is the strength by which a shattered world would emerge into the light. I understand faith to be the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen. It is with faith that we create something that has yet to be seen, for we do not need faith to create what we can already see. Faith and hope together can push us to imagine a world that is united, that works together across differences so that together we win. We need bold and brave leaders today. We need imaginative leaders today. And finally, we need leaders who are willing to lead with love. I said it, love. Love is a word that I think we have overused and allowed to become minimized and anemic. But love is truly a powerful force that overcomes so many of the ills, so much of the discouragement, and so much of the divisiveness that many of us have just given into, even through our own apathy. Love is not some trite thing that we throw around on a Valentine's Day card and show with stuffed animals and chocolates, although chocolates are good. That's not an excuse not to give a Valentine's Day gift. I say this to my husband all the time. But love truly can transform, can change, and can turn things right side up again. Love is not cheap grace. Love is not feigned forgiveness. But love, when put into action, which is part of the mission of Habitat, can create a world where those who are once down and out can come up and thrive again. Dr. King also goes forth and says that one of the greatest problems of history is that the concepts of love and power are usually contrasted as polar opposites. For love is often identified with a resignation of power, and power with a denial of love. But what is needed is a realization that power without love is reckless and abusive, and love without power is sentimental and anemic. Power at its best is love implementing the demands of justice. And justice at its best is love correcting everything that stands against love. Justice is love in public. We need leaders who are willing to take up the mantle of love and lead with love. In a recent Harvard Business Review article, Creating a Purpose-Driven Organization, the authors propose that a leader's most important role is to connect the people of their organizations to their purpose. Leading with love requires an insistence on empathy. Empathy is required to connecting your employees to their purpose. The authors say that many corporate leaders try to use only their heads to invent a higher purpose intended to capture their employees' hearts. But when you begin to listen to your employees, those on your team, find out what matters to them, you realize that a higher purpose already exists. So purpose is not just a lofty ideal. It actually has practical implications for your company's financial health and competitiveness. The authors write that people who find meaning in their work don't hoard their energy and their dedication. They give them freely. Defying conventional economic assumptions about self-interest, they grow rather than stagnate. They do more and they do it better. By tapping into that power, you can transform an entire organization. When we lead with love, we can transform our corporate bottom line. When we lead with love, we can transform our communities. When we lead with love, we can overcome the turbulent times that we have because we're focused on leading with purpose and empathy, a listening ear, an imaginative mind, and strategies that lead towards transformation. I know the power of love. Many of you do as well. But I've witnessed it in my own personal life and how it has helped to overcome some of the divisiveness and divisions that led to who I am today. I'm the daughter of a white woman of German descent from Winona, Minnesota, and an African-American man from Atlanta, Georgia. My mother was one of 10 white women who came to Spelman in 1968, Spelman College, a historically black college in Atlanta, Georgia. And in 1968, 10 women came there white women came from Winona, Minnesota. 19 African-American women went from Spelman to the Winona College. During that exchange, my father and my mother met. They fell in love. And my mother's father in Minnesota found out that my mother was in love with a black man and began a letter-writing campaign of hate spewing, which he would have called at that time warning. My mother decided that she would accept my father's proposal for marriage, and they married, and my grandfather came to the wedding and sat in this small chapel and wept loudly the entire service. At the time when I was about a year and a half, my parents decided that they wanted me to meet my grandparents, despite all of the hatred that had come their direction. So they drove to Minnesota from Atlanta in a van again. You all remember those Volkswagen vans? And back then, there were no real car seats. So the story goes that we got and we pulled in the driveway. My grandfather stood staunchly in the driveway. And before my father could open the door, I jumped out of the van and I ran to my grandfather, and he stood there stoic, and everyone watched and wondered what was getting ready to happen. And I jumped and leapt into my grandfather, and all he could do was hold his arms out to catch me. And I hugged him apparently so tightly that tears began to roll down his face. He never said another negative word. The love affair of me and my grandfather began that day. I saw in that moment, and I hear as the story is retold, how love can transform and change, break down walls, break down barriers, force us to approach things from a different way. There's a generation behind us and before us that is waiting on us to change this narrative, to insist on being bold and brave, to insist on being imaginative, to insist on leading with love in the work that we do and the way that we do it, in the words that we speak. We deserve better. Our communities deserve better. We can come together and create a narrative that together we win when we're willing to step out and do something we've never done before, when we're courageous enough to dream again, and when we're selfless enough to lead with love. Won't you pray this prayer with me? Disturb us, Lord, when we are too pleased with ourselves, because our dreams have come true when we've dreamed too little. Disturb us when we've arrived safely because we've sailed too close to the shore. Disturb us, Lord, when with the abundance of things we possess, we've lost our thirst for the waters of life. Having fallen in love with life, we've created and ceased to dream of eternity. And in our efforts to build a new earth, we've allowed our vision of the new heaven to dim. Disturb us, Lord, to dare more boldly, to venture on wilder seas, where storms will show your mastery, where losing sight of land, we shall finally find the stars. We ask now, Lord, that you'd push back the horizons of our hopes and push back the future in strength, in courage, in hope, and in love. Help us to dream again, to work and to lead with courage as we strive together to build hope and communities. And together we all said, amen.